Okay, Harish,
Okay.
share your screen.
Yeah. Let me put on the video.
Wait. I have to make him a co-host. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I did that.
So I can screen share now, right?
Yeah. Now you can.
Okay. It's here. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thanks to Tejas and Vamsi and the organizers for inviting me to speak at this seminar. So let me start with the since I have only 30 minutes, so let me quickly get to the topic. So I would like to speak about some comparison theorems for Kähler manifolds. So let me quickly begin with.
Sorry, Harish, can you pause? Vamsi, did you start the recording again? I heard a recording has stopped. Oh, I see it.
Yeah. Again.
Sorry, Harish, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So let me start. So first I'll speak about classical results in the Riemannian setting, and then a bit about how these generalize or what modifications have to be made in the Kähler case. So the general theme of comparison theorems is that the more positively curved a space is, the smaller it is in some sense. But of course, the word smaller carries is doing all the weight lifting in this sentence. So that's and also the notion of positive curvature is also going to play a role. So I'll quickly illustrate what exactly I have in mind. So one of the earliest results in this direction is the Myers-Bonnet theorem. Now, to begin with, in all these comparison theorems, there is a model space. And one would like to say that if our given Riemannian manifold is sort of more positively curved than the model space, some geometric quantity will be smaller than that of the model space. So in the Riemannian setting, the model space is in the positive curvature case is the round sphere of a radius n. This metric has the property that the Ricci curvature is just n-1 times the metric, and the diameter is exactly pi. Okay, so the Myers-Bonnet theorem, which goes back to 1941, says that if you have a complete Riemannian manifold with Ricci curvature greater than or equal to n-1 g, the point being that this greater than or equal to whatever it would have been for the sphere, then the diameter is less than or equal to pi. In particular, the manifold has to be compact. This is one of the things that one learns in the first course in Riemannian geometry. And okay, so let me move to the next slide. The standard proof of this involves an application of the second variation formula for the length functional. And it's quite straightforward. Interestingly, that proof doesn't tell us what happens if the diameter is actually equal to pi in this theorem. So that had to, the case of equality had to wait almost 30 years. And then Cheng proved his famous maximal diameter theorem. So this states that, well, the same hypothesis, Ricci curvature greater than this. And then if the diameter is actually equal to pi, then M is isometric to Sn. And coming to volume, one has, again, the hypothesis, the notion of positivity needed is just Ricci curvature. So if you have a complete, or well, we know it's compact, let M be a compact Riemannian n manifold with Ricci curvature greater than the expected thing, then the volume of the manifold is less than that of the sphere. In this case, the proof directly yields that if the volume is actually equal to that of the sphere, then M is isometric to the sphere, round sphere. So that both of these results are pretty, satisfactory in the sense they prove exactly what one would have expected without any additional assumptions. But there are the one thing which one can ask in such settings is, especially the case of equality. For instance, here in the Bishop theorem, one can ask if what if volume of M is, we know that if it's equal, then it's isometric to Sn. But what if the volume of M is not equal, but very close to that of Sn? So it will have to be less than that of the sphere, but more than the volume of the sphere minus epsilon, let's say. Then can we say that somehow the manifold, the geometry of the manifold is close to that of the sphere? This question, of course, would have made sense even back in when Bishop proved the theorem, but the only point is that there was no suitable notion of being close geometrically. So, but after Gromov had introduced his notion of Gromov-Hausdorff convergence in the 80s, the notion of closeness between Riemannian manifolds, there was by then, after that, there was this notion became well accepted. And so in 1996, Kolding proved an almost rigidity result, which generalizes the equality in Bishop's theorem. So here the key new concept is that of Gromov-Hausdorff distance between compact metric spaces. So this is supposed to capture the notion of closeness of two Riemannian manifolds, or more generally metric spaces. So here, let's start with two compact metric spaces. The map between them is said to be an I'm defining Gromov-Hausdorff distance. So you start with two compact metric spaces. A map between them is said to be an epsilon approximation. The map need not even be continuous. So if the distances between points are preserved up to an error of epsilon. So f of x1, x2, the distance between that and x1, x2 is less than epsilon for all x. And the second condition says that the map should be almost surjective. And the metric epsilon version is that if you look at the image of x in y and take the epsilon neighborhood of that, that should equal to y. With this notion of an epsilon approximation, one defines the Gromov-Hausdorff distance to be infimum of all epsilons, is that there are epsilon approximations from x to y and y to x. As I remarked, this map need not even be continuous. So this notion of closeness in this distance, of course, one has to check that this is a distance, but given that, the notion of closeness is not that refined. But amazingly enough, in the case of positive Ricci curvature, it captures a lot of information, as I'll soon state. Well, back in the general setting, as expected, the Gromov-Hausdorff distance between x and y is 0 if and only if x and y are isometric. And this was all for metric spaces. For manifolds, Riemannian manifolds, one just takes the Gromov-Hausdorff distance between the corresponding metric spaces. The metric will give rise to distance functions. Then in Kolding in 1996 proved this important result. that given epsilon greater than 0, there exists delta which depends on epsilon, such that if M is a compact Riemannian manifold with the same bound, same Ricci-Kavacha bound as earlier, and the volume is close to that of the sphere, then the geometry of M is indeed close to that of the sphere. Well, at least close in the sense of Gromov-Hausdorff distance. In a separate paper, Colding also proved the converse, that if it works both ways, that if Ricci-Kavacha is bounded below, Gromov-Hausdorff closeness will also imply that, oops, again I made, so this should not be, I mean, DGH here, there's a mistake here. Here I want to say that the volume of M is greater than volume of the sphere minus epsilon. Now, the thing is that, yeah, as I said, as to begin with, Gromov-Hausdorff distance is very crude, but under this Ricci-Kavacha bound, one can say that it actually, you can relate the volumes of two manifolds if they are close, which simple examples will show that will not be true in general for compact metric spaces or manifolds. And moreover, there is this one has the diffeomorphism stability theorem of Cheeger and Colding, which says that under either of these two hypotheses, namely that given Ricci-Kavacha is bounded below, either the Gromov-Hausdorff distance from the sphere is small or volume is very close to that of the sphere, one can conclude that M is actually diffeomorphic to Sn, which is also a very strong conclusion. So that completes my quick summary of the Riemannian background. By the way, I started with the Myers-Bonnet theorem, which dealt with diameter, and then moved on to volume, and then this Colding stuff is about volume. One can ask whether similar things hold for diameter. What if the diameter is very close to that of the sphere? Do we have this? Apparently, that's not true, but well, yeah, not apparently. I mean, it's clear that that's not true, because one can take the case of the Hopf vibration S3 over S2, and by shrinking the fibers, one can show that one can maintain the Ricci-Kavacha bound, but the Gromov-Hausdorff limit of this of S3 with this fiber shrinking will be actually S2, the round metric on S2. So one can't even conclude that the limiting manifold will have the same dimension. This at least fails. And moreover, this, all of these fail actually, because the diameter of S2 is the same as the diameter of S3. But you can only conclude that the limit is Gromov-Hausdorff. You can't conclude that the Gromov-Hausdorff limit is close to S3. It will go to S2. So for diameter, surprisingly, this fails, but for volume, this it works well. Now, when we move over to Kähler manifolds, the first thing is that something has to change, at least as far as the Myers-Bonnet theorem is concerned. So the results in the Riemannian case only require the positivity of Ricci-Kavacha for Kähler manifolds, it turns out that the analog of the Myers-Monnet theorem with a positive Ricci curvature assumption is not true. To make, to quantify this, I have to first say that what the model space in the Kähler setting is. It's no longer the sphere, which is not even a Kähler manifold, but rather its complex projective space endowed with the Fubini-Studi metric of constant holomorphic sectional curvature. Well, the 2 is not that important, but the point is, it is CPN with its canonical metric, which is the Fubini-Studi metric. Why this is regarded as the model space is something which can it can be seen in many ways. One way is that, after all, why do we regard the sphere as the model case? It's just that one reason is that any Riemannian manifold with constant positive sectional curvature has to be locally isometric to the sphere. Likewise, here, any Kähler manifold with constant holomorphic sectional curvature, in other words, the sectional curvature of two-dimensional subspaces, which are invariant under the almost complex structure J. If you demand that only those holomorphic sectional curvatures are constant, then one can again conclude that the given Kähler manifold is locally isometric to CPN with the Fubini-Studi metric. So, well, if I take this normalization 2, then I get the Ricci curvature is this multiple of the metric and the diameter is this. So what is a counterexample? Here is a simple counterexample of why the Myers-Monnet theorem fails. One just takes the product of CP1s, which are basically round S2s, with the product metric. Now the metric on each factor is the round metric, but I have scaled it by this factor 1 over n plus 1. I do that so that I get just this to get this condition. So then Ricci is equal to n plus 1 g. But a simple Pythagoras theorem computation shows that the diameter is square root of n over n plus 1 pi, which is larger than the expected diameter, which is that of CPN, if n is bigger than or equal to 2. So this shows that just this Ricci curvature bound will not do in the Kähler case. But it does the same bar, the expected bound does hold under a stronger notion of positivity of curvature. And this is perhaps the most, at least from one point of view, the so-called holomorphic bisectional curvature is the most relevant one in the Kähler case. And it turns out that if M has positive holomorphic bisectional curvature instead of just positive Ricci curvature, then it does hold. Now, the funny thing is that this notion of curvature was introduced way back in the 60s by Goldberg and Kobayashi. They were, this theorem I'm about to state was proved only in 2006. So let me just state what this condition is. By the way, so this condition is that for any unit tangent vectors x and y, rxy plus rxjy xjy, sort of if xy and xjy are orthonormal or orthogonal, then each of these two terms will represent a sectional curvature. So the sum of two specified sectional curvatures is bigger than K. This is just some normalization constant, the inner product stuff. So J is the almost complex structure. So this, as I said, this is like sum of two sectional curvatures being greater than something. So it's certainly much weaker than demanding that all sectional curvatures are bigger than something. But it's strong enough that it actually is stronger than positive Ricci curvature. So this condition here implies this. Now, it's not very intuitive why one would consider this kind of thing at all to begin with. So the Goldberg-Kobayashi paper sort of sheds some light on this, but still it's not as geometric as sectional curvature or Ricci curvature. But why this has been studied extensively is almost any theorem which can be proved on Kähler manifolds with the usual sectional curvature assumptions can be the same thing, can be proved just by replacing sectional curvature by holomorphic bisectional curvature, both in the positive and negative cases. So, well, so somehow this seems to be important, but why it's so, it's not entirely clear to me. Anyway, coming to this, so in 2005, Tam and Yu, no, actually it's not Tam and Yu, it's two other authors, proved that if you have a compact Kähler manifold with B greater than or equal to 1, so here I've replaced the Ricci curvature hypothesis with this bisectional curvature hypothesis, then the diameter of M is indeed less than or equal to that of CPM. So the second variation formula argument doesn't work here. But what is used is a comparison theorem for the Laplacian of distance functions. And this proof sort of also can be used to recover the Myers-Ponnet theorem in the Riemannian case. Again, the case of equality, their proof does not tell us what happens in the case of equality. So various attempts were made to prove the deal with the case of equality. There were some partial results. Recently, Ved and I were able to show that if you have a compact Kähler manifold with B greater, and if the diameter is equal to that of CPN, then M is actually isometric to CPN. So this would be the analog of the Cheng maximal diameter theorem in the Kähler setting. Now, surprisingly, well, the Bishop's theorem about volume generalizes exactly like it, the same without any modification of the curvature condition. So MB compact Kähler manifold with Ricci curvature greater than this, the expected thing for this CPN, then volume is less than CPN. If equality holds, then now this is a very beautiful, elegant statement. Unfortunately, the proof is involves quite a bit of algebraic geometry and some developments in developments in this solution of the Kähler-Einstein problem and so on. It strays far from the traditional settings of differential geometry. And but nevertheless, one has this. So this is, the Cheeger-Colding stability theorem also generalizes here that if volume is close enough to that of CPN, then M is actually here it's much stronger than the Cheeger-Colding theorem. Here one can say that M is actually biholomorphic to CPN, not just diffeomorphic. That left, so but that left the other two Colding theorems open, and Ved, Song, and myself, we proved that Colding's Gromov-Hausdorff closeness theorem also extends. So given epsilon greater than 0, there exists delta such that if M is compact and the volume is close enough to that of the sphere, then the Gromov-Hausdorff distance between the two is less than epsilon. Again, the proof, while quite short, involves a lot of heavy machinery, which uses quite a bit of stuff about the developments in Kähler-Einstein metrics. So it's not so I would say it's still not entirely satisfactory, but that's the way it is. Okay, so now I've used up, let's see, I started at 9:40, it's 10:08. How much time do I have?
You can go until 10:15, say, a little bit.
10:15, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, so there were two results of ours that I stated. One is the diameter rigidity theorem, and then this Gromov-Hausdorff closeness thing. Now this one, as I said, strays quite far from the concepts just used in the statement. So let me just talk about the diameter rigidity theorem. To begin with, the positive bisectional curvature assumption already says something without any assumptions about diameter or volume, already has a very strong implication, which was known way back in 1980. So Frankel had conjectured in the 60s that any compact Kähler manifold with positive bisectional curvature is biholomorphic to CPN. And two completely different proofs came up in around the same time in 1980. One was due to Seo and Yao, and the other one is an algebraic geometry proof due to Mori, which actually Mori's proof gives much more than just this statement. So, but at any rate, we can start by assuming that the Kähler manifold that we have is or just underlying the complex manifold is just CPN. So essentially we have CPN with a different Kähler metric and with a bisectional curvature lower bound. And one would like to say that if the maximal diameter is attained, then the given metric is just the Fubini-Studi metric. So here, yeah, okay, this part of the talk is quite technical. So the point is that it involves the proof involves consideration of currents on CPN. Now, what current one has to look at is not clear to begin with. There is so let me skip this part and then just move on to this. Right. So you start with a kilometric on CPN with B greater than or equal to 1. So fix a point and look at the distance function to that point. So in the around 2010 or something, Tam and you had proved that, had done some computations for the Laplacian of the distance function. But very recently, I think in, this year, Lott observed that if you take this specific function, log of cos squared of dp by square root of 2, then whatever computations they had done for the Laplacian of just dp can be recast in a very nice way as follows. So you look at omega, which is the Kähler form, plus square root of -1 dd bar of this function c. Lott proved that this is a current to begin with, because this distance function, rather this c, is not smooth everywhere on the manifold. Wherever the distance function becomes non-smooth, namely at the cut locus with respect to p, it's not it's not differentiable, but one can look at dd bar of c in a distributional sense. No, not distributional sense, as a current. And if one look, omega, it's of course 1-1 form that can also be regarded as a current. So this this sum is actually, which is a priori defined on the complement of the cut locus, extends to a non-negative current on CPN. So this was our starting point. We have a current to work with, a global current on CPN. And then, given this, we prove a general result about closed non-negative 1-1 currents on CPN, namely that some so given this, then one comes up with this quantity, a strange looking quantity, which involves a current, a point on the manifold CPN, and an R. So if one has looked at currents, and one would see that one of the main quantities regarding currents is the so-called Lelong numbers of currents. This is related to that. So, but this is slightly different in a very crucial way. So, but if one looks at this, one proves that this is increasing in R. This is the main technical lemma. And the thing is that, and one also knows that as R goes to 0, one gets what the Lelong number of the current at Q. So just these two bits of information, the fact that as R goes to 0, you get the Lelong number, and that this is increasing in R, well, not just these two. Then one also has a small lemma saying what exactly we get a lower bound for the Lelong number. Putting all these things together, one actually gets what one wants. So unfortunately, that part is a bit technical, so I can't go into that. So let me just stop here.
Thanks, Harish. Thanks, very nice. Yeah, are there any? Oh, let's thank the speakers. Sorry. And are there any questions?
I have a comment, not a question, but you said this bisectional curvature is not very clear, right? Why it is? Basically, it's just Griffith's positivity. You look at it as vector bundle. Bisectional curvature positive is Griffith's positive.
I see. Yeah, that's right. Griffiths positive, yeah, as opposed to Nakano positive, which would require
Positive curvature operator.
positive curvature operator, right? So yeah, no, that's okay. That's just a different name, though. I mean, why is Griffiths positivity that natural to begin with?
That if you deal with vector bundles, it's natural. But
See, the point is that even without going to Griffiths positivity, the way why did Goldberg and Kobayashi think of it? Well, they just looked at the Bochner formula for harmonic 2 forms on Kähler manifolds. So the curvature term there involves can be written as some of these bisectional curvatures.
okay.
So one has that explanation, but I don't regard that as a very convincing sort of, I mean, compelling thing. In the sense that what I mean is Ricci curvature can be related to volume, sectional curvature to lengths of curves, and so on. So this doesn't have any analog.
Well, if you take a vector bundle and it has a metric, the projectivization has an O1 bundle.
Yes.
And the induced metric on that being positive is precisely the same as the original one being Griffiths positive.
Yeah. No, I know all that. Yes.
Ampleness of a vector bundle is very closely tied to Griffiths positive.
Yes. I know all that. Yes, I completely agree with you. But this is a very subjective thing. What is natural is, or what I would call geometric might not be the same thing what you would call geometric. To you, anything which doesn't involve Moser-Schrödinger inequality would be geometric.
Yeah, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Harish, I just wanted to understand the proof that you kind of some of the ideas you sketched. This is for the rigidity, diameter rigidity, is it? And
yes.
What about the Gromov-Hausdorff, the closeness?
Yeah, that's what I said. Even in the Riemannian case, the Gromov-Hausdorff closeness thing for diameter instead of volume. It's not. It clearly fails. As I said, if you look at the Hopf fibration, shrinking fibers, collapsing S3 along the fibers.
No, but for the volume, equality, you have a...
No, the diameter case fails. The diameter Gromov-Hausdorff thing fails for the Riemannian case as well.
Right.
So I think Shubhajit is asking about result with Jian, I think.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
What is the question?
No, so could you comment on the proof there? I mean,
the proof there. The proof there is, I mean, as usual in these things, one assumes that the result fails and then takes a limit and tries to get a contradiction. That is the gist of it.
Does it use the sort of the equality case somehow, or?
Well, not quite. I mean, to some extent, yes, because at least the stability theorem of Liu is used. See, to begin with, you already know that since the volume is closed, M is biholomorphic to CPN. But that's not nowhere good enough. Here, the statement is metric. The point is, so you just take a limit. You take the Gromov. So assume that it's not true. You get a sequence of epsilons. And then you, with these conditions, then you take the Gromov-Hausdorff limit and then see whether you get a contradiction. Now, that's the heart of the analysis. So you can say a lot about the limit, unlike the real case. So it will be a Kähler manifold with singularities to begin with. Now one has to use some heavy machinery to rule out that there are no singularities, in fact. And then you can say that one can, once there are no singularities, one can use the rigidity in the smooth case to get a contradiction.
So also we need this rigidity, I guess, also so that the the second Betti number is basically 1, right?
Yes.
So
that's what I said. So right at this stage, the Liu stability theorem will imply that M is already biholomorphic to CPN. Right here, So the second Betti number will be 1.
So I guess that fixes the Kähler class, and then this sequence of counterexamples that Harish was mentioning would actually be almost Kähler-Einstein manifolds. So that's the punchline, and then one takes the limit and then uses this whole nonsense about case stability and so on.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that nonsense is your livelihood. Don't be
Yeah.
so discouraging.
Yeah, any more questions? Okay, so since we are packed schedule and we don't have any coffee breaks because there's no coffee, we are online. Let's move on to Ved's lifeblood or